Thank you very much, and thank you for the invitation and that I can present my work here. So I would like to talk about this, and actually I think this is an amazing course that you are taking part of, and it goes from modeling to experiments in animals, and then animals, robot interaction, and so on. So it's sort of similar that actually what I did during my career, and I started my PhD in physics and working on purely modeling collective behavior, and then I transitioned toward doing more experiments and developing tools to understand the data that we can gather, and then developing different systems and to understand animal behavior, so studying more animals, and then animal-robot interaction, which I may or may not have some time to show. And so I was 2 years in Oxford working in Behaviour in the animal behavior, and then I moved to Constance working with Professor Ian Cousin, who I think also he gave a talk here, right? And then in 2019 I moved back to Budapest and I founded my own group, and since then I'm there. So it's a very interdisciplinary topic, and it's nice that you are coming from a different background. So and because of that, we sometimes use different language. So some of the things that is for different people from different backgrounds. So I may say some of the things that may be obvious for you, and I try to keep the balance. But just let me know if something is too detailed or not detailed enough. I was asked that there should be question at the end. Okay. So from the physics perspective, so I study collective behavior and modeling, and this collective behavior phenomena occurs in a wide range of species and very different, from the microscopic scales to full range of animals, and also from the physics point of view, I think the universality is a very useful concept in some sense, that whether the local rules that have this synergistic effect, that the collective can do things that none of each individual is capable of, whether it's an artificial agent, the individual, or an individual cell, or it's an individual organism, and so on. But also it has some drawbacks. Like some people take this universality very seriously, and then just studying one example and then claiming that, okay, this is how it works, that this is how it's very universal. And then just I also wanted to point out that, well, like everything, it has pros and cons. So sometimes when this collective phenomena, it may look like very similar how Starling flux behaves or what locusts do, but sometimes the local rules are actually very important and may not be the same. And one extreme example, in case of locusts, when they're marching and they travel through like continental scale, one of the force is that they want to avoid being eaten by their own mates, right? So this is something that it's an extreme interaction between them, which may or may not, well, it's most of the case doesn't happen in any other scenarios. So still, I think it's a very useful mindset to try to understand this as a system that, okay, there are local particles that do something and I don't care whether it has some characteristics or anything, but sometimes it may lead to some oversimplifications. And I was asked to talk about this study, which is show how pigeon flocks flies. It was a work with Professor Tamás Picek, and then the visualization shows the real GPS data. It's a 9 individual flying as a flock, and then they're flying towards their home. So you see from the top down view that this is somewhere down below is their home loft, and where they want to get there. And while how do we understand the influence, the leader and the follower relationship? And for that, we developed this method using the the trajectories and to calculate correlations. And so the correlation would tell us how similar one's path to the other, and then allowing some time delay between them and finding the best matching time delay. So it tells us two things: how similar is the path is with a given time delay, and with the highest correlation, we may find that yes, there's highly similar paths, and because of the time delay, we could have some causal relationship, that who is the leader and who is more following. And from that, we could build up this hierarchy, which is unique to the system of pigeons. So not all bird flocks are like this. You know, there are these large starling flocks up to, I don't know, 10,000 or even more individuals. Some of the rule may not work the same way. But in case of pigeons, there is this multi-level hierarchy, and how influential someone is on the top. And then in this particular day, which I showed, the yellow guy was the one who most of the time was the leader. But what you see here in this video, that there is this turn, that this yellow guy actually initiates a turn to the opposite direction where the home is. So this happens now. And then what you will see, that they fly a bit to this direction, and someone else lower in the hierarchy initiates another turn. So the system has the capability that the leader, who was most of the time a leader, and he's good in doing this, does a bad decision basically, to guide the flock to an opposite direction. So the system has this capacity that temporarily someone becomes a leader, and then they get back, and then again after the turn, this guy leads them towards home. So it does some things about, I think, which is very interesting or important aspect of leadership, that I think it's mostly in case of pigeons especially, it's not leadership, it's followership. So the followers, the members of the flocks decide that, okay, there's all around me, there's a lot of navigational cues. They use the sun as a compass, they may use a magnetic field, which is it's a debatable, well, it's a own topic on its own, but they use sound, they may use sound of the oceans and the smell of the different, and they have landmarks and visual. So even without any other individual around them, they are able to get back home multiple ways. But if there's social information around, it's a decision that they may or may not follow someone. So, and it works. So we found consistent individual differences. So those guys were being the leader of the group most typically, they happen to be on multiple occasions. But whether, for example, can these individuals recognize each other? And I know that, okay, this guy is worth following because he's doing, typically good decisions. And to understand that, we don't know. Well, at least I don't know, and I don't. There's a study on that. So they surely can recognize themselves by their looks, but whether in the air they know that who is making this decision, we don't need to assume that. Just because if they have a tendency to decide that whether a decision is good or bad, and some individuals does more often good decision, and then they are the ones that being followed more than others. So yeah. Okay, and then we were interested that for the pecking order, the word for hierarchy is basically coming from these pigeon flocks, that we know that there exist in the lofts, that who is first. So we did some other studies where we were interested, and this is now with 30 guys. So it was during the time that it was the technology that we also developed, some very small GPS devices that allow to track them and then see how the temporal patterns changes, and then ask the question that how does this flight leadership hierarchy relates to the dominance relationship. And what you see that after the flight they get out, and these small backpacks containing the GPS, now we put color coordinates, and we needed to develop so many things in computer vision That's now like trivial how someone could identify that. And then we define this region where they can access the food, and you see these white connections show that this queuing range, if someone wants to get to the food, that who is the one blocking its way from getting there. So coming up some automated way to measure interactions between them on top of the classical way how ethologists would rate and pick a focal individual and check them. And then we can see, well, here that individuals, how much time they spend feeding, there's a very large differences between the individuals. Some of them spends like 5 times as more time eating, and probably the amount of food they get is also much, much larger. And also we can see that when this is happening, so actually during the first 4 minutes of and so on, so those individuals eating the most, they are prioritizing this food source, so they are typically eating first, and there are other guys who need to wait and get there. So if we order these matrices, then we find it's really not homogeneously distributed randomly. So there are this clear hierarchy that we was looking for, this pecking order. And then we developed some other methods that, you know, how we identify interactions. So you see in these frames that a white guy is trying to peck and the other is avoiding and moving away. So using relative vectors, which direction they are facing, which direction they are moving, how can we detect these? And what you see here is with the red arrows, these when someone is moving towards and the other is avoiding, and these white spotlights are the manually identified interactions, highlighting this. And then we find some highly correlated behavior. So this is the pecking order you can get from the feeding queuing that I showed with the cup, and this is with the pecking, the traditional way. And so we found automated way how to analyze. And then comes the question that, okay, we have multiple different ways to understand dominance hierarchy within the loft of the same group. And then is this relates to the flight leadership? And we find it's independent. Basically, who, you know, someone can be a typically good leader of the group, and when they get back, he pushed this or she pushed aside, and those are more dominant gets the food, at least at the beginning. But also on the other way, because again, there are examples of many terrestrial animals that the leadership is correlated with the dominance relationship. And this example, for in the air, there's no way someone to force to being followed. Like in many examples, a chimpanzee recruiting others to follow them, they can go there and then, you know, force them by beating them or whatever, right? So in this case, this voting system that happens in the air, in case of pigeons, I think it's very clever. Okay, and there are different studies, so I try to put them that makes them some logical connections. So this is a study where you see here is a flight of a peregrine falcon, and then how they use thermals, and then for human pilots, and you can clearly think about this as an optimization problem, that depending on the strength of the thermal column in which you are circling, you gain height and you can elevate. You should the glider should choose their speed if they want to maximize the cross country. So you want to travel far away using multiple thermals. That if you fly faster, then you lose more height, and then there's an optimal gliding angle to find. It's described by this McCready-Terry. And then we find that, look, competitor pilots and the peregrine falcon was really doing this very well. But, and again, we were basically, in some sense, lucky, and in some it could be a scientific intuition that we study peregrine falcon. And since just last year, a month ago, we published a study across 12 species that actually there's a full spectrum of different strategies between between birds, that whether they really use macrady or they do something, a very different strategy for this problem. And during this time, actually we tagged some storks, and that time we needed to put on the loggers, and the logger was recording the GPS data, but there was no remote way to download that. And then the first day we downloaded the data, it looked super great, three stork thermaling together, and this was before the study. This was really the way the inspiration how we started to study pigeons for the flight trajectory that I showed. And then these storks, they just left. The third day of their life, they were thermaling. They left to Africa with the devices and with all the data. But anyway, sometimes, science or the same interesting questions finds you. So when in 2015, when I moved to Germany, worked with the Max Planck Institute there, it turned out that Andrea Flack and Martin Wittkowski, they did this large-scale study with the newer devices that was able to remotely download the data. They tagged a bunch of 60-something storks that time with these special devices. And again, from the physicist's point of view, I think what is really interesting that these guys travels, thousands of kilometers, and they rely on these thermals, which are inhomogeneously distributed resource that they need to find, and also within the thermal that where exactly are. If they circle a meter or two apart, then it could be a several-fold the uplift that they can gain from it. And then they can always rely on the flapping if they want to, but that's energetically very expensive. So if you see that, well, the scale of a wing flap to these thousands of kilometers, there are huge orders of magnitudes, but on every level, they could rely on social information. And then these local scale decisions can really have large consequences that you sit next to in the school may just end up really affecting your life trajectory. And so this device had not just the GPS, but also accelerometer data. So you have small snippets of 4 seconds every 10 minutes, and 2 individuals. And typically in the thermaling part, they don't flap their wings, but you see 2 vastly different individuals. One on the top is almost never does any flapping, and the other does a lot. So in the next slide, I will use this color code that whoever does the average as compared to the group is green, and who is much less of that's blue, and the red shows those guys who are flapping a lot. And then just color coding this with this flapping activity, the tracks, these 5 minutes long bursts when all the GPS devices record it synchronously, you start to see some structure. So it's a very complex problem that how do they find the thermal, how they decide when to leave, and so on. So how they use social information. And once this flapping activity, we plot it as compared to how much ahead or behind they are, which is also not a trivial question, right? Because they fly in 3D. There are these thermals happening in 3D, actually changing in time, moving around, so it's not a stable thing. So we try to convert everything to a one-dimensional problem that how, given that the motion I'm doing, how much time I need to get to a closest point to the other guy. So and then we can simplify this multi-dimensional problem into 1D, and then we see this super nice correlation. So those are the guys who are flapping a lot, who are behind a group. So it's an extra effort that they make. They pay for staying with the group. And then what we see here is then checking what are the followers, the guys behind, what are their spatial position. And because it could be that, okay, some guys are ahead, but these guys are following them later, it would mean that they are typically flying on the same path. But what we see that during gliding, where all of them sinking, those who are followers, they are also lower down. So they try to stay up by flapping, And also when they reach the next thermal, they arrive there lower. And when the other guys leave the thermal on the top, they leave early just to stay with the flock. So it's an extra effort they pay, and then they benefit less from the environment. So it's it's this Matthew effect that rich gets richer, the poor gets poorer. There's a positive feedback loop. So these guys are really trying too hard to stay together with the group, and it's very demanding for them. So this is what you see, that how much the more red, the more flapping they do, they actually benefit from the thermal less. So why are they doing this? What is the benefit that they are having? And this is, well, on the bottom left, you see the three-dimensional representation of the 3D track of the two guys, and from the top view. And then we see that locally who is ahead and who is behind. And then if we check the derivative of the curvature, which shows that if you have perfect circle, then your curvature is constant, then the derivative is basically 0. So if you go on a straight path, that's true as well. So the more search you do, then the more your derivative will be higher. So this is what we see, that the typical leader, the thermal itself is invisible. It needs to be discovered by where it actually is, by flying in and out from the different regions, what the leaders do, and then followers, they benefit from it, and they can now follow the path of the others. So this invisible thermal column is actually painted by the different individuals, the leaders of the group. So, and this is the benefit that also not just typical followers gain, but also if a leader falls out and falls behind temporarily, it gains benefits from the group. And then again, so this is what I show here, that typically these are 1/3 of the group that doing this exploration, and then the rest can gain benefits from it. And then if we, this is the 4 weeks migration route of the different individuals, color-coded based on the flapping activity. So what we see here, that those guys, in the blue, who does very little flapping, they're flying through even the Sahara. And some of the guys who did a lot of the flapping, they just stop and overwinter in Spain. And then it's basically 15 minutes, this is what we check, 15 minutes of the data within the thermally is enough to predict that where they will end up after these 4 weeks of migration. So it's a very strong predictive power, and it's this is juvenile storks, and actually it's much more complex, the system, because once they get, if they survive, 85% of these guys dies. Well, this is not the downside of the story, but when you see storks, that a successful couple of storks, they can breed up to 20 years, and they can have 4 or 5 chicks every year, right? It would be like a population boom, that two individuals produces 100 of them. So this is why actually, well, a lot of them dies during the route, but they also sense their environment, and they are very sensitive that even, the economic situation within the country that they fly through impacts their survival rate along the way. And yeah, there's all sort of interesting things that I won't talk about, and then Andrea Flack and her colleague studying this, you may guess that, okay, the good guys, the better flyers, those are going to Africa, and they have a higher survival rate, right? Well, it's unfortunately, it's the other way around. The survival rate seems to be higher for the guys who are stopping in Spain. And from the GPS location, we see that they overwinter eating at garbage dumps, right? It's something that is a recent change. Like 30 years ago, there was no, plenty of food available during the winter. So the environment is also changing, and us humans changing the resources for them. So maybe there is actually this transition that affects these migratory birds and their behavior. But if there's a harsh winter coming, they may just, all of them die who are following this. Okay, but they sense the globe, but also they sense the thermals. So if again, from a physics point of view, if we ask this question, that how would we want to understand the thermal columns and the physics of the thermal columns? What sensor should I build? Should I build some LIDAR or radio signals or small drones that they would fly and try to map that? And one way that, okay, let's use animals as biosensor and let's use these tracks to try to understand the thermal itself. So if now, they do this exploration, and if you average these tracks and have the spine of the thermal as a relative coordinate system, this is what we get for the vertical speed. So it's strongest in the middle, what you see this nice parabolic profile. So then we can try to analyze that how the underlying flow field would look like. So reconstruct the three-dimensional vector field that describes the movement of the air. And then we can understand more that what are the actual decisions that they are doing. So if you look at the tracks within this moving air, sometimes the whole thing is drifting, and they need to accommodate. And the smooth way is actually to turn the way that they just flip the circling direction, and then they shift the center of the circling. And these shifts actually happening synchronized within the group, subgroups, some ad hoc different groups. Actually, some of them just changed together with others, but it's not. It's changing in time that who is changing with who. And then, if we go one step further, and this is currently that we soon will submit this research. That okay, what if we really use the physics way to model how these guys fly, that whether we can have a better representation of all the aerodynamic properties of these individuals, which is very hard to measure. During the tagging, they are still so small that they are unable to fly, and the loggers can give actually data from throughout their lifetime. Yeah. So that we could understand the aerodynamics properties, the behavior that they do, and at the same time the underlying physics. So, and to get that, we create some synthetic data, which is shown on the left, and create flow fields where these artificial agents fly, and then just use the tracks as an input that whether we can get back and reverse engineer how the flow field would have looked like. Yeah. Okay, so now there's another topic. You'll see that it will be related to the first one. And then, in case of pigeons, I thought I showed this hierarchy which is multiple level. But what happens if there's multiple hierarchical levels within the social group? And how we can understand that? And what you see here, well, and it happens in several animals that, okay, there's a bigger community, like a science of intelligence, a cluster, but within that there's labs, and within that small working group, and so on. So how does that work in nature? And we studied this in these wild horses, Swarovski horses, that there's a reserve in Hungary. And this is the most closest relative to which we know from this cave painting, that they used to live all Eurasia, and now, well, worldwide, I think their number is around or less 3,000, and 300 of them living in Hungary, in this highly protected national reserve, and what you see here. And then we were interested that whether high-resolution, tracks can be used to understand their, social dynamics, but this reserve was founded 25 or something years ago, a relatively large land where only just some cattle and these guys as large land animal lives. So we have the coloration, the natural coloration patterns on that, which the highly skilled technicians working with the animals can recognize these 300 individuals. So this is also a project that we are working currently, that whether this can be replaced by automated methods to identify the individuals, but this was done by humans. And then we have this this population monitoring 25 years back for every year, where many of the things can happen. So they live in this super harem, the harems moves together. A successful harem stallion can have a harem up to 15, 20 females and the young offsprings. And then, because of that, there are several individual young males that they don't have. But this shows a lifetime from a point of view of one harem on the top. So the red circle shows when, and the name here is the name of the ID of the harem stallion, that it starts and there's a change and the harem is growing, and sometimes there's a change in the harem stallion, and then but the group itself could remain the same. So the life of a harem could outlive any of its individual. A bit like that, you know, in our body, all of the cells are being replaced, and every 7 years or so, the entire body is completely replaced, and still the group itself, or the body, feels like the same as before. And then from the perspective of an individual, you see one lifeline of this guy called Felix, that he started building up a harem. He got quite successful and having a large harem, so the length of this bar shows that. And then got injured and lost, and this harem went most of it to someone else. And then after that recovered, and as a good businessman who manages to rebuild its company, and again he actually did this a third time in his life. So you can have these different point of view, different strategies. And then what can happen with a group? There are just few examples how just gradually shrinks a group, or basically stay unchanged, but there's a change in its leader. So there's a new harem stallion, and so on. Or sometimes it can get just completely dissolved. And again, well, yeah, I don't want to anthropomorphize these guys, but also many of these things, we see this from human groups and for companies and so on. So this is an animation from these 25 years where some of the harems are color-coded, not all of them. And as you see that, okay, this is increasing. There's a point where actually they reach sort of in 2015 they started to reach. So what they decided it's the maximum number for this area. So they tried to started to use some medication, PZP, some anti. An equivalent of an anti-baby. Sorry about this example. But so what you see here is that, yes, there are these lines that some harems really outlive any of these individuals. It looks like a bit of a mess. But the nice thing is that this drone measurement, area measurement, was done in 2018. So we had before, but also this population monitoring after these drone measurements. And because it's a highly protected species, we have all the genetic sampling from each individual. So we know whose father and mother is who. And here I show it with the size, with the number of offspring. So again, you see this order of magnitude differences. Some successful individuals can have 100 times as much offspring with a large harem, which keeping this large harem for a long time, as any other, as other normal individual. So this is how it looked. There's one drone filming the entire population, and there's another one going around that flies so close to them that they really don't bother. They're so used to that. And then it allows to individually recognize these guys. And then this is, well, you see, the drone, the slower drone, is just running around and recognizing that. So how they move naturally, and then we needed to convert this into geo-referenced coordinates, these images, so using different landmarks from the ground, and this is how the data looks like. The black axes are these bachelors, these males that doesn't have a harem, and the color coding shows the actual harem structure within that time. And then we use the correlation method to identify similarities between the movement pattern. So you see here these tracks, and then this is within one harem, and then you see that even within that harem there are more similar movements. So we can get to below the harem level as well to study how similarly each individual are moving, and then reconstruct this social structure. There are harem structures, but also there's within the harems, the harem stallion has some connection, and we find some very interesting things that how related harem stallions actually protect each other. But also, the nice thing was that from the past similarities, even for individuals belonging to the same harem or to different harem, we can not just see back to the past, that how they ended up there, but predict things in the future. So individuals currently belonging to different harem, and later in the next 2 years, some of them would change. Already the past similarities, we can significantly predict that which will be those individuals that's changing. So this just few minutes, like these were 5 times 5 minutes of videos, will allow us to trace back in time and predict things, and not just understand the actual social structure at the time. Okay. So some of the things that I will show is also, it's very nice that here at the Science of Intelligence that you are very familiar with these techniques. And I think, well, we share some of the mindset, but I think we are actually yet in a minority, but it's very nice to be in this environment. So this is at the Max Planck Institute of Animal Behavior, and you see this some 100 years old building, and next to it is a bar where we worked with Professor Ian Kazin and Máté Nagy. So I had this idea there that, okay, what if we could convert this space into this high-tech facility to study collectives, multiple different individuals, interactions, and measuring everything everywhere all at once, sort of, that typically in an ethologist experiment, you pick a focal individual and look what it's doing, or pick one channel of information flow that, okay, let's see vocal communication, and then buy microphones and record the vocal communication. So whether we can come up with some arena where it's modular, so we can do lots of experiments differently, but there are the different system that we develop there, or we custom tailor it to work with animals, works synergistically each other. So this is how it looked like. Unfortunately, this is being dismantled, but in Constance there's the hangar, imaging hangar there, which is even a bit larger than this. It was sort of like maybe twice the size and a bit narrower and 4 meter high. So you can lower down the ceiling, that you can work with wild animals, get birds there and then recatch them, or even let out them to fly out, which I did with some experiment with pigeons. And then it was very convenient that you work with the pigeon, you do something, then let out, and they fly back home, where the next day you can just pick it up, until some local predator realizes it's a timed feeder, and every 30 minutes just someone flies out of it. Anyways, and you also use here some motion capture system, which is very reliable, and also the other thing is that the delay between getting the data is super low. It's within like 10 milliseconds or so. That you can use this as a direct feedback mechanism. So what does animal do is influence anything within the area. So we can put feeders or that's based on different behavior, where the animal is or what the animal is doing, are activated, or replay some of the trajectories of animals with robots, or the behavior of any kind of robot or projection. Like here, we also work with augmented reality, so you can project things, but the projection itself could be interactive based on the behavior of the animals. So connect this system into one. And then for humans, many of these systems are developed, but if the animal is large enough, like a cat-sized animal, you can still get the full skeleton. And if you go lower, then, and you know, in a locust or in a moth, you may know you can just put one sticker on these guys, and you don't know who is who. You can't identify, because in case of pigeons or the starlings in this example, the exact position, because this motion capture system works with sub-millimeter precision, it's a very tiny difference between the marker pattern, identify not just the exact 3D coordinate and orientation, but has a unique constellation that which animal is which, right? And then we wanted also to record sound, so there's a microphone array on the top where you can use normal spectrography, but also can localize the 3D, the source of the sound as well. And then also develop computer vision techniques, so that it's good. Very many times these animals don't mind that small 5 or 4 millimeter diameter small marker is glued to them, and they really don't care. But the whole system is quite costly. But what if we can use this data to train algorithms, and then we can get rid of the markers, and still we would get something. So it opens up so many possibilities. I will show example of that as well. This is just some numbers, like we had the Vicon system there, and this can go up to 300 hertz, so the numbers of positions per second, and you see this sub-millimeter precision. And it's just an example of one pendulum circling around, and we have RGB cameras from the top, and 2 other cameras we can just place wherever to have a stereoscopic view. And then again, we work with biologists as well. This is the very beginning, one of the first video we make. You see there's markers on the head, so who looks on who, how they're influenced, and who eats how much, and who they are looking at. And yeah, there are studies where you can predict maybe how likely that they will end up in an agreement in case of this is a business scenario, or in case of, well, in case of other human interactions that you can see here as well. Also, we try to push the limits of the system and see how much we can do. And see here that some of the tracks are not continuous. Well, sorry, it's a bit dark. So in case of this is 4 bats flying together. Some of them we just put a sticker here, and then some of them lost it. But still, many interesting questions can be asked, that how they are, for example, when they fly together, the echolocation signal is like a flashlight, and whether they blind each other or they adjust. And many of the system is developed for humans. You see, we have these goggles on with my colleague Fumihiro Kano. So the real time, the monitor at the back shows that we can get this real time that's also not just the head position, but the gaze of the individual. So we can study here animal-human interactions and many ways that even this gaze can be used as an indicator of something, and so that is you interact with the environment. So in case of pigeons, they can have these multiple markers, 4 markers on their head, as you see here. And then we can study how the group, how they decide how much they feed on, or how much they actually watch for predators, right? It's a trade-off that during the time I'm checking that it's safe to eat, I cannot eat, but then how this is distributed within the system. So there's some nice study also published recently by Kano and his colleagues about this, that how they react when the predator is approaching. But also we can recreate reality in a synthetic way, in a virtual scenario. So this, what you see here, is just a real camera image, and just this is based on the markers on the head and the back the recreation of the same scene. And you see that, well, the legs are, these guys are not moving because, well, we have this body and the head only tracked. So we can, it shows that, well, from reality we can get to virtual reality or augmented reality to recreate scenes that how the world looks like, the point of view of the different individuals. I will skip some of this, of the acoustic tracking, so we work with Starlings, and if you are planning to, then have a second thought on that, because they are quite nasty, and they find different ways to try to get, demolish your different technology, and the pigeons are very nice to work with. Anyways, it just shows that during how different days, how different individuals starts to explore the area, and then how they find within the sawdust there are some nice meal morphs for them to forage on, and then from the flight trajectory, or there are these sitting branches, and then you see that, well, how different individual looks. And then, spatially and temporally, you can understand that how this develops. So within the time, within this is a 2 hour, how much they spend perching on the first day, second day, third day, and so on. And what you see here, or this is for foraging as well, how the group, starts to discover, and this blue guy starts the first, this foraging, and then how, as the day goes by, actually the group behavior starts to become more and more uniform, and then now they act and fly together as a group. And then this is true for flight, and how the flight network also pass similarities during the flight with correlation, and how with the Jacquard index you can check that how similar is the behavior, so how this is increasing day to day, so how the group actually forms here. The nice thing about any of these examples that I show, it works simultaneously. So we did very little experiment where we actually used the functionality that we can track moths and bats and birds at the same time, or humans or dogs or whatever. But everything works there. And then, well, there's some, and you need to be aware that for the acoustic tracking, the precision is much different. So it's you see there's much more noise in the system. So with the motion capture, you get sub-millimeter precision, and then with the acoustic, you get up to like 15, 20 centimeter. But it's typically enough to localize individual. And as I said, we can use this tool to develop new methods. And then you see a bounding box, but typically for AI or a machine learning algorithm, you need a large data set to train on. And typically this is done by humans, clicking on the key points of the individual. So because of the markers, we can have these markers, and then even from the relative position of the markers on the head, we can calibrate that where exactly the eye and the beak is, and come up with ways that now we trained the algorithm to recognize the eye, which is not marked, and then you see there is no marking on the animal anymore, and it works, and it can identify the same way. So this was published in CVPR, which is one of the computer vision and pattern recognition, one of the highest ranked conference there. So really the computer science community was really open to this, and maybe, as I said, in the similar conceptual thoughts that all this we created open access databases. And in another paper working with computer scientists from Constant University, that we showed that even you can just go out to the wild, because sure, before it was a studio setting with very similar in the training and in the test, but it works relatively well even outdoors. Yeah. Okay. Then I would like to just show some of the newest results, and again, some of you may be very familiar with virtual reality, and I don't know how many of you tried VR before as your own, okay? And whether this virtual reality system is clear? What is okay? Then I will just quickly explain and use a video showing that well, it's a 2D image. I will tell you from the beginning, and still we recognize it as a 3D image, right? Because the perspective of the 2D image matches our point of view. So, but once this is, you know, it's broken, and then you see the image from a different point of view, you realize that, well, it's actually a 2D image. And when it gets back to the right angle, then you actually, you know, it's unrecognizable as compared to the 3D image. So this is the way how this anamorphic illusion works. And then, so every time that the fish sees sorry, no. Maybe maybe I show it here. Just a second. I will get back to this. So this is shown. Also, there are different systems. It shows a Drosophila, and then so the scene is projected on a two-dimensional surface, but because from the point of view of the animal, and either the animal is fixed or the animal is being continuously tracked, if the view matches its perspective, it will see as these are 3D object. And this 3D object, for example, in case of this fish, some of them is a virtual fish, so it's projected on the surface of the it's projected on the surface of the ball, but the individual sees it that this is being part of the, you know, it's inside. So it's a volumetric thing. It's an immersive reality, and then it can swim around, and in theory, sure, it can swim inside the virtual fish, but it's happened very rarely, right? And then so we can study this, yeah. Well, there are multiple questions that one can ask. How does the decision making works when there's multiple targets? So it's a study working with colleagues from Konstanz, Vivek Sridhar, and Liang Li, and so on. That you see that up to a point, individuals follow an average point where there's a bifurcation, where the decision is made, and then they choose. But what happens in case of multiple targets? And there are some neural models that they can recreate these patterns. And even in case of these multiple targets, and then you get these very nice patterns. But then you can use virtual reality to study this very analytic way. And then in case of this locus, there's this motion compensated ball as well. So it's not just recreating the virtual scene, but it feels like the movement, because when the movement is dragged. So and it stays at the same position without needing to be fixed, which is a bit cruel. And then what we see here is like examples of the Drosophila and in case of locus, that the multiple choice is actually broken up into multiple binary decision points. And then you can think about this because the neural model creates this, but each way you can think about the collective also as a super entity that has some decision-making characters. Sorry, I go back to this one, and this is the last thing I wanted to show you. Sorry. Yeah. Then how we can study, the local decision-making rules, and then how what's the sensory motor control. So in case of fish, they are very good at swimming in swarms, but then how do they decide? And in case of these smaller fish, it's the nice thing that hydrodynamics does not play much role. It's depending on size. If you go lower, and if you imagine like very tiny fish, it's basically, or even lower than bacteria, they don't swim like we do in the water. They basically need to drill themselves as if it would be a very thick honey that they need to go through. So the the vortices that they generate, it dies out very quickly. They swim in this burst and glide pattern. And then we did some studies that in case of larger fish, hydrodynamics are important, and they can, they can interact with the vortices that generated by some others. But because of that, here, the hydrodynamics doesn't play much role. They mostly rely on vision. And then this is also what, well, you are here studying this, how vision can be, it's fully enough to create some collective motion. So we were asking that whether we can reverse engineer that, what's the local mechanism, how from the visual inputs, how they decide what to do. So how to reverse engineer this sensory motor control as an engineer problem. And to do that, to study this very analytically, then virtual reality was a tool. So this shows the projections, how a simple 2D projection is projected on the ball. And then what you see here, what you see here, what you see here is an example when two of these virtual reality is connected together. So one fish is in one ball, the other fish in the other ball. They both see a virtual fish as an avatar, but the avatar is controlled by the other fish in the other ball. So we create this system called the matrix, well, because these guys are only connected through the virtual reality. And then we can ask the question that how these guys are swimming together. Is this different as compared to if you put two real fish in the same arena the same way? And we see that if we network these together, basically they swim identically to the way, this is the graph showing that how two real fish swims together, and then how they do swim when they only interacting through the virtual reality. So as soon as this is true, that we can recreate reality virtually, then we have so many ways to actually control and manipulate that. Maybe this avatar is being controlled by the real fish, but we can change the appearance, how big it is, or what exactly it is doing. So for that, I will show some examples. So in case, sure, we can come up with artificial speeds, that's how they cope with that if the speed is changing. And what if there's no burst and glide? Or what if this is a different update rate? So how important is this feedback mechanism from what it sees? Or if periodically the other guys can be invisible, and then how the algorithm that the fish decides to do can cope with, missing information. And then, again, sorry, I keep pressing the wrong button. I need to stop. So what we come up with is something a proportional derivative law, which is, it's even like first year engineering students learn about this, that how this could be used to control a system, but it comes with a cutoff. So after a given distance, they just give up, they don't try to follow. And it's this optimization that we find out from the real data is also giving us this very few parameter that this model has. And then we can go and see that, how well this is working. And we can ask question that what happens if now this avatar is being controlled by the fish, but now I replace the control, and it's not the fish who is controlling this avatar, but it's now our own control law, which we named BioPD. So anytime, it's a bit like, again, in the movie Matrix, when an agent replaces any avatar, and now it controls the movement or the behavior of that. And then it's sort of like the Turing test, in which, how you can check artificial intelligence by sending messages to either a person or to an AI, and you don't know, you need to decide that, can I differentiate between is it human or an AI? And if you think that, well, if you basically can't, it would be an indication that the the level of the intelligence of the AI is already reached the level of a human. So in the same way, we test fish here. Then the fish, the focal fish, that interacts with its avatar, and the avatar is being controlled by or reverse engineer mechanism or another fish. And in both cases, the avatar reacts to its motion, right? So this full loop, because either the other fish is interacting with from the other ball with the projection, or in our case, this BioPD is also adaptively reacting to this focal motion. And so what we see there, that we can't, so our model is good enough, and we can't distinguish from the behavior of the focal individual whether the avatar is being controlled by the real fish or the BioPD. So we think that its pass is a Turing test in a sense that is already good enough to replicate in reality. And then our colleague there, Professor Liang Li, they replicated this actual law in very different robotic scenarios. You see some drones and some terrestrial robots, and this is the normalized energy as comparing to this MPC, which is the best engineering design solution for this following problem. But that one is actually computationally very, very intensive. And ours, and it needs to be specifically adjusted, its parameter set to these different scenarios. And in case of the BioPD, we just take the reverse engineer laws, and with the reverse engineered parameters, we don't even need to change the parameters, and then we found that it works almost as sort of theoretical optimum. But it's much more, computationally much more cheaper way getting these results. Yeah. So, well, we went through multiple topics. I want to mention that this is all in collaboration with several people that I really feel fortunate that I could work with them. And many of these things, there are my co-authors who are much more expert in any of this topic. And then I just wanted to show some of this was basically past work, although this last one just recently was published. So this is my current group with 5 PhD students and a postdoc. And I want to thank you from the Hungarian Academy of Sciences for the past 5 years I had the funding from. And thank you for your attention.